Okay, so obviously the headline has grabbed people. You've heard about the story. Um, and there's been a lot of conversation on both sides of the conversation of the topic about how this could have happened in Virginia and with the ex Virginia Tech football player. You guys have heard about it. Ex Virginia Tech football player found. I guess you're not found not guilty. You're acquitted of murder
He
charges.
actually he was found not guilty.
It's found not guilty. Okay,
Right.
found not guilty of murder. And
It's the same acquittal of not guilty. Same concept.
sure. What I guess what we're trying to do here on the podcast is give people an understanding of exactly what basis he was found not guilty on, and we have a treat for you guys. We have the attorney in the defense who is on with us today, a gentleman by the name of James Turk. Look, James, there are people who are highly upset with the decision in this case, that look at the facts of the case as they have been presented, at least in what you can read in the article, and think, how in the world was this young man not convicted of this crime? They feel like it's a hate crime.
It's not a hate crime.
Guilty of a hate crime. Okay, tell me why people are wrong about this.
Because people don't understand the facts, and the I guess the thought behind why it might be a hate crime is because a gay man was killed, Jerry Smith. However, this was not about killing a gay man who happened to engage in a sexual relationship with my client as he posed as a female. My client, Isimemen Etute, and Isi was, barely over the age of 18. He'd just become an adult. And he was out on social media, Tinder, looking for some hookups. And he saw on social media there was a connection between he and Angie Renee on Tinder. Angie Renee then reached out to Isimemen Etute and said, how about let's get together and I'll perform oral sex on you. And so Isi and one of his friends went over one night, and Isi ended up receiving oral sex from a person who was dressed as a female, who had posted pictures as a female on social media sites, on Facebook, on Instagram, and had held himself out as a female by the name of Angie Renee. And there was an Angie Renee, but Jerry Smith had stolen that person's identity and used her photographs and posted as a female and posed as a female. And so Isi went over thinking that he was going to engage in a relationship with a female. She was wearing a hoodie. You couldn't see where, who she was. It was in Jerry Smith's apartment under his conditions, posing as a female, telling Isi, I can't show my face. I can't disclose who I am because I'm a doctor. But drop your pants and I'll perform oral sex on you, which he did. And paid Isi $50, as crazy as that sounds. And then Isi ended up receiving, and he had his doubts, I guess, to some degree, because one of his friends said, Isi, that was crazy. You don't know whether that was a female. It could have been a male, and he didn't think that it was, and his friends didn't think that it was either. And so about 6 weeks after this first event, Isi had actually blocked Jerry Smith at one point, but he talked to some of his friends, and some of his friends said, you ought to, this Angie Renee has reached out to me. So Angie Renee tried to connect with another young football player at Virginia Tech. And then he called Isi and said, you hooked up with this person? And Isi said, yes, I did. And he said, well, you know, what's up with this Angie Renee? And he said, well, I think it's a female. She's posing as a female, but I'll go over and we'll find out. And if it turns out to be a male, I'll simply run out of the apartment. And so that was the plan. And he went over with two other 18-year-old football players, went in the apartment, and met the same way, met at the door in a completely dark apartment, with this person wearing a hoodie, turned their back immediately as he walked in. I mean, this sounds so bizarre, but this is all true. And so EC follows this person into the apartment again, and then the person says, "Okay, well, drop your pants." And he said, "No, I want to, I'm here for intercourse this time." And so the person then turns around and drops their clothing. EC feels around a little bit, said it didn't feel right, and he had a flashlight on his cell phone, pulled that out, shined the light in the person's face, and he said it was a man. And it was this person, Jerry Smith. And Jerry Smith laughed at EC. And I think Jerry Smith then started freaking out, and because he had been caught, and started reaching for something on the side, over towards the side of his bed. EC never saw a weapon or anything, but he was born and raised over in the Virginia Beach area. His grandmother's been robbed multiple times. He knows his grandmother keeps a gun under the bed. Rough neighborhood. EC knows, a lot of gun violence. And, he said, I was certain that this man now was reaching for a gun and was going to kill me. And so EC ended up hitting him. He fell to the floor, kept reaching for something, and EC hit him 3 more times, and then said that gave him an opportunity to run out of the apartment, and he ran out. And 2 days later, the police, after discovering that Jerry Smith had been killed, there was some video in the hallway of the apartment. A couple of the officers identified one of the football players. They ended up bringing him in the early morning hours and talking to him. And there we were. And so, the police questioned EC about what happened. He was fully cooperative, and gave the police, statements about questions that they inquired about. And they never did ask him whether or not he was in fear for his own life. They never asked him whether or not he was in fear of this person reaching for something. But EC got out of jail a couple days later and told his friends, a couple of the football players, that this guy kept reaching for something. And he had no idea, but there would later be a knife discovered over beside the bed. And EC had absolutely no way of knowing that a weapon was there in the very location of where Jerry Smith was reaching. So it was a self-defense case. This is not a hate crime. He didn't kill him because he was gay. He killed him out of defending himself in circumstances in which he feared for his life.
Mm. So I know you just mentioned that when he spoke with the police the first time that he did not say that he was in fear of his life. And I'm assuming you're saying that because he did not mention to the police, your client, in his initial interview, that he thought that Jerry Smith was reaching for something.
That's right.
Correct? He didn't even mention that.
That's correct. He didn't mention it because it wasn't asked by the police.
But he did say that he hit him. He didn't say why. Is that what you're saying? He didn't. Right. In his initial interview, he told the police he hit them, but he didn't tell them why he hit them.
That is correct.
So you all pled self-defense in this case. My question is, when he punched him for the first time and he was on the floor defenseless, and he initially had, if I'm understanding the facts correct, he had two other friends on the outside with him. Why did he continue? Weren't two other friends outside in the hallway?
They were outside in the hallway downstairs out of the apartment.
Okay. Why did he continue to punch Jerry Smith? Because it's my understanding that every bone in his face was broken.
No, that's an exaggeration. That's not the case.
What were the extent of his injuries?
He died of blunt force trauma to the face, and there was no weapon used. It was only his fist. And EC said, and what happened, Rachel, was during the altercation, he said that Jerry Smith had hit at him first. EC said immediately, the first he said he grabbed his crotch before that happened, and then he started reaching for something beside the bed. EC said he hit him one time in order to slow him down or to prevent him from reaching over beside the bed. He did not fall to the ground at that point in time. He fell back on the bed. And then EC said that he continued to reach for something over beside the bed. And at the same time, he swung at EC. EC said he hit him again a second time to prevent him from reaching and grabbing something on the side of the bed. He said he then fell to the ground. And then said when he was on the ground on his back, he continued to reach for something under the bed or beside the bed. And it was pitch black dark. This was in Jerry Smith's bedroom. He controlled the entire environment. You know, he knew what was there. EC couldn't see.
Well, he had the flashlight.
Well, he had
the flashlight on the phone.
That's correct. But he said that, you know, that during the I guess the altercation with the two, you know, his only thought was he was reaching for a gun to shoot me. That's the only thing that EC said that kept running through his mind. He's reaching for a gun to shoot me. He said that I hit him once, he fell back, hit him again, he fell to the floor, and he was on his back, but he was still reaching, and it was directly beside the bed. And he said he continued to reach for something under the bed. And I hit him 3 quick times, and the medical examiner said those hits were probably within a split second. And then EC immediately says he got up and ran out of the apartment.
Huh.
And I will tell you,
sure,
that what the jury did not hear was this has been going on, guys, for 8 to 10 years in the Blacksburg area, where I talked to so many other young people who had been victimized by the same guy who would not come forward, who said that if they would come forward and testify if they could remain anonymous because they had gotten their life back together. They did not want for their name to be disclosed and for them to be ridiculed for having the same thing having happened to them years ago. And so, that was never disclosed as well.
So when you say victimized, you mean that Jerry Smith, according to what you've heard, had a pattern and a history of posing as someone else in order to lure somebody into a sexual encounter, is what you're saying.
Posing as Angie Renee with
Posing as Angie Renee.
the same name and the same pictures, and luring these young students, primarily targeting young Black males.
So I have another question for you. Did Jerry Smith have a history of violence in any of those situations to where he was in any encounter with anyone? Had anyone ever said Jerry Smith assaulted me, or Jerry Smith reached for something? Was there any reason, based upon the people that you talked to believe that he was capable of hurting or killing someone?
Well, no, there had been, were there any convictions for violence against him? No. But I can tell you that he repeatedly, or on a number of occasions, accused people of robbing him, telling and describing for the police that it was a young Black male. And then the police found out on a couple occasions that had been made up and had not actually happened at all. Another instance was 8 years ago, a young college student was in his fraternity, and he was very intoxicated to the point that he thought he passed out. This happened 8 years ago. He woke up the next morning and said, I got this bizarre feeling, and I can see a guy who was performing oral sex on me. Well, one of his roommates or one of his fraternity brothers walked by that night and said that he had seen somebody with a hoodie in his room performing oral sex on his friend, and he thought it was a girl. Well, they reported that to the police. After Jerry Smith, and they ended up getting DNA from that kid's underwear, from saliva. That was 8 years ago. Just recently, after Jerry Smith had died, they sent in his DNA for comparison. And sure enough, it turned out that he was the one that had performed oral sex on a boy that essentially had passed out. And the kid said that he'd been drugged.
I guess my question is, you said the jury didn't get to hear that. Did the jury not hear that because it was prejudicial or because it was irrelevant? Because that has no bearing on this particular case.
Well, that's why in Virginia, we have to, when we try cases, we have to comply with the evidentiary rules. And the judge said that, any past instances of similar acts would not be admissible. They're only admissible under some limited circumstances. And also, I had wanted a lot of, some of these other young people that this had happened to come in under anonymity, so their identity would not be disclosed, and they would feel free to talk about this to a judge or a jury. But none of them wanted to. The judge ruled against the anonymity request, so they would have to have come in and had their name disclosed potentially and identified, and none of them wanted to do that.
So here's the brass tacks to me. Trans and gay Americans are the victims of irrational violence from people outside of their community pretty regularly. The numbers are sobering, staggering, and shocking, and the violence that happens to them. There are people who feel like that this case was the case of someone who entered into a relationship, a casual sexual relationship with someone who they thought was a woman, found out that this person wasn't a woman, got with their friends, went back to this person's house, and then beat them to death. Okay, that's the way the story comes across. The reason why I asked you if one second, the reason why I asked you if there was a history of violence was because he came back. I gotta be honest with you, James. I'm tap dancing around it. It doesn't seem to make sense to me. I'm not in any way relitigating the case. I know you had a job to do. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense that you take three people, you go back to the house to confront the gentleman, and if you find out that it was in fact a man, you just go, I'm going to run out. It seems to me logically, and I'm not in any way trying to indict the young man again, but it seems to me that you go over there with two people because you're pissed about it. He was angry,
embarrassed,
angry and embarrassed, and you go back over there because you're expecting some sort of confrontation. That confrontation ends in somebody being killed. Maybe he did laugh. I'm not saying that the fact that a knife was there is immaterial. It just seems like if I look at this from the other view, this is easily a situation where you're in my house, you're mad because you found out about me. You could easily argue that James Smith would have been defending himself by even reaching for the knife because he's in a tense and hostile situation with someone that he may or may not deceived. Not relitigating that part, but it seems as if reaching for the knife, if it were a knife or a gun, when somebody's in your crib when it's hostile, could have been James Smith defending himself. Do you see that view of things?
Yeah, I can see that view, but again, you're dealing with a young 18-year-old young man. You just turned 18. You got three young kids that are 18 years old who go over there. And again, the jury listened to all of them. And I don't think they questioned the truth and veracity of any of these young men. That I think they were all completely believable in what they said. They're all young, naive kids, and there's a lot of evidence that certainly that would support the fact that a young man's brain is certainly underdeveloped at that point, at that stage. And again, Etute's never ever been so much as called down on the football field for being too rough. He has no criminal history. He has no violence whatsoever in his history. He's exceptional. He's an exceptional young man. He is very soft-spoken, and again, not a violent bone in his body. And again, I'll go back to what I said before. You're in an environment that is, and the evidence was that this guy kept his apartment pitch black dark. He told these people that came into his environment that, I have to keep it this way because I don't want you to find out who I am or see who I am, sounding like a girl. And we heard Jerry Smith talk a couple of times as he was posing as Angie, and it certainly sounded like a female. And so, again, it's young 18-year-old boys in an apartment which is completely pitch black dark. They can't see anything. It's the environment that Jerry Smith has set up, saying that, my name is Angie Renee. I'm a doctor. I can't disclose who I am. I don't want anybody to see my face and ruin my job.
James, I have, I'll just ask one question. It's tough to piggyback on what Van is saying is because I know one of the things that the defense argued was that there's a lot of circumstantial evidence on behalf of the prosecution. And that's mainly because Jerry Smith isn't here to testify. We don't have Jerry Smith's side of the story. We don't have Jerry Smith's word. We only have the word of your client. And just to add to what you were saying about him going into the dark apartment, he willingly walked into a dark apartment. You know, like he put himself in that situation, not once, but twice. My question to you is, there's a lot of violence within the LGBTQ plus community. And this case, and the reason I think that this ruffles a lot of feathers, and rightfully so, is because this case could possibly be setting a precedent.
Absolutely.
To more violence being, oh, like if I'm a part of this community, how do I feel protected and okay when I'm listening to the facts of this case or the circumstances of this case, and then your client is found not guilty? What kind of precedents is this setting in regards to violence against specifically the transgender community?
But you're not targeting. I don't see this as a targeting of the transgender community or anybody. Well, let me pose this question to you. Let's say, for example, that Jerry Smith, posing as Angie Renee, had invited let's say a lesbian into his apartment. And so a lesbian goes into the apartment expecting to have a relationship with a female Angie Renee. And let's say that he ends up penetrating her. All right. And then so you have a female that then is strong, and she ends up killing Jerry Smith.
It's still a crime against the transgender community.
Are we even talking then?
I know.
Who's going to say that, you tell me, who's going to say that he didn't deserve what he got because he posed as he was posing as a female and violated a female?
Well, okay. So, and I think we're getting to the heart of things. Before we go to that, I have a question for you, just really quick.
Sure.
Was Jerry Smith a man who lived his life as Jerry Smith and had an alter ego as Andrew Renee only when it came to luring someone into a sexual encounter? Or was Jerry Smith a trans American that lived their life, her life as Angie Renee every single day?
No, Jerry Smith was a gay man.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then who you're saying had an alter ego as Angie Renee whenever they wanted to lure someone in.
Posed as a female and used a ruse to target primarily young Black males.
Okay.
That was the preferred gender.
Okay. So let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
Do you in and of itself, do you feel like Jerry Smith was a sexual predator?
I do. And I told the jury that. I do.
Is there a part of you that thinks that anything that happened to Jerry Smith, or do you think that the jury might have thought, I'm asking you to get into people's mind, I know this is not a technical legal question, that anything that might have happened to Jerry Smith was warranted based upon the lifestyle that Jerry Smith was living?
No, okay. I do not. No, that would be wrong for targeting someone simply because this had happened to them and you're after them because of them being a gay man. Again, that was not the argument. The argument was that this was a set of circumstances in which Isimemen Etute found it necessary to rely on self-defense.
Out of curiosity, what was the composition of the jury?
There were 4 men and 8 women.
Interesting.
Yeah, we had, and then there was one alternate that was a female. We had one black female, and that was the only African American that we had.
To Rachel's point, do you see how members, well, as we do this, it's Pride Month. Do you see how members of the LGBTQ community would feel less safe surrounding the verdict of this, because they would feel like it sets a precedent for someone to be harmed if in fact they are in a relationship with someone who they weren't sure of their gender? Because we see this all the time. We see people who don't disclose the gender to somebody else. They find out that, don't disclose their birth gender to someone else. They find out, they get violent, and then somebody ends up dead.
During that act, they find out and end up, and again.
Well, not even during the act, even after the act, right? So it's not even during the act, it's even after the act. It's like if you have sex with someone, or if you're with someone, or sometimes they have sex with the person and they full well know what's going on with the person, but the societal pressure and the scolding that they get in the after effect of it drives them to such irrational anger that they get violent.
That's what's referred to as the gay panic defense. We don't have that in Virginia anymore. And that was not argued in this case. And that's referring to, you engage in a relationship with somebody, and then you find out during that relationship that may be somebody who is not the sex that you thought they were. And you react based on that alone and end up harming that person, killing that person. But that's not the facts under these circumstances. And I see what you're saying. I do. And, I would hope that under these circumstances, we also might learn that it's not right to engage in these ruses either, and target young people, because I will tell you, these young football players at Virginia Tech were on Tinder, and you know how that the Tinder works. Their interest was solely in straight females, and Jerry Smith was posing as Angie Renee, and the interest of Angie Renee was only with white, or not white, but with males. So, that's not right, guys. It's not.
It almost sounds like a warning, which is why, like, the way you just almost phrased that almost sounded like maybe you better think twice about fooling people, because I think that's just what's so unsettling about this, because you could with everything you're saying, you could equally say, well, he got paid for getting a sexual act. Like, maybe you don't do that. Maybe you don't go into a dark place with someone that you don't know. Like, you could do a lot of that back and forth. And I think that's what's really hard for me to accept with what you're saying here.
Yeah, and to be honest, I understand that as well. I mean, there's responsibility for yourself, and not putting yourself in, that type of environment also. And I get that, Rachel. I mean, that makes perfect sense as well. However, again, every single case is looked at specifically in the environment that Isimemen Etute was in, and the way that he saw the circumstances that particular evening. And I think rightfully so, and the jury found that it was reasonable for him to fear for his own life.
Yeah. I disagree with the jury here. I'll just be honest with you. First of all, I in no way there are a few things in life that are more precious to me than the young black male. I understand the unique challenges of growing up in America as a young black man. I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I say this on every podcast. Okay. I understand the challenges that exist, being preyed upon, being fetishized, being all of these things. I get it. I understand. The reason why I say, and I'm not sure, I gotta be honest. It's I don't. For me, the Pandora's box that's being opened is, okay, you shouldn't endeavor into these ruses. Fine. You should be honest about everything. You should be honest about everything. When you're trying to have sex with someone and you're trying to do whatever with somebody, you should be honest. You shouldn't say that you play for a specific sports team or that you're rich. You shouldn't lie in any way or deceive anyone in any way to get sex from them. You should say, hey, this is what I mean. You shouldn't lie and tell someone that you have a big dick and then get them into a situation and you shouldn't tell any lies, right? The question is, what ends up happening is, which lies warrant a violent response and which lies don't? Like, which things are we going to allow manhood or toxic masculinity to denote? You can kill somebody for it, or you can even enter a situation where someone could be killed for it. And I think before we get to the self-defense part of it, which is really hard for me to reconcile, I'll be honest with you, we get into a situation where you shouldn't do that. Okay, you shouldn't do that, so then what? You shouldn't do that, and what does that mean? There are a lot of things that you shouldn't do. The question is, when is it warranted to have a response be, I'm going to hurt you? Is it warranted to have a response be, I'm going to hurt you if a gay man or a gay woman hits on you and you don't like it? Is it warranted to have a response if you see somebody from far off and you go, oh, I want this person. I go up and you start talking to them. You turn around and then you realize it's not who you thought it was. When is your view of masculinity or your sense of masculinity, when does that warrant you using violence? And before we even get to the self-defense part of it, that's why I don't think whether or not Jerry Smith should have been doing what he did is material here. He definitely shouldn't have been. And if you ask me whether or not he was a sexual predator, to be honest with you, if everything that you say is true, then yeah, he was. Seriously, absolutely. Yeah, he was. If everything that you say is 100% true, then he absolutely was. It's just a really delicate thing in trying to decide if he deserved to die. And it's hard for a lot of people. And it would be amazing if there could be a huge conversation involving this young man to where we discuss how this, like Rachel said, isn't going to be used as precedent to attack and hurt people that are either closeted, right, and gay and not out, or that are trans and are entering into relationships with people who maybe they thought they knew what was up, or that they haven't told the people yet. But if we give any oxygen to the notion that you can kill them, like as a community, we're going to lose because there's so much violence that's happening already. It just seems like that's a non-starter. And so it's hard for me. I know more about this case now that you've been on our show than I did before. And I do think there are levels to it and aspects to it that people are probably unaware of. But James, I gotta admit, this is a fucking tough one, man. This is a bitter pill to swallow. It's hard. It's absolutely hard. It seems as if even a manslaughter charge or something where somebody would have to pay some penalty because there was a life lost would be in order. But I don't know. It's hard for me. And I'm playing dime store lawyer here. I'm playing dime store juror here. But it seems as if in this situation, he went over to the house. He asked the question. He didn't like the response. And then he says he was reaching for something. I don't know what he's reaching for. I got to beat him to death. What would you say to somebody like me?
Again, I would say that nobody deserves to die. And however, again, under the circumstances, it's tough being able to really comprehend how fast your mind has to work when you're in a dark environment, completely dark environment, in somebody else's environment, in their bedroom. And I know you've gone up there, yourself voluntarily. I understand that. And to find out, whether or not this person was a man or a woman. But, as the jury said, or as the jury heard, the intent from these boys, young boys, was to simply find out and he was going to run out. Now, again, had Jerry Smith probably looked at him and said, listen, what I did to you is wrong. And, I apologize. Would Isi have probably just run out at that point? I would probably say so. Again, maybe you need to hear from him. Maybe you need to see the same person that 12 people from Montgomery County saw. Maybe so.
That brings me to my next question is, I think what's also troubling for me is when I hear the story that was laid out, that you laid out for us, not to the jury because we weren't privy to that. There seems to be a lack of remorse because it was reported that, and yes, you could, I do want you to answer this. It was reported that after he punched him, he left and your client left and Jerry Smith was making bubbling and gurgling sounds and he still left with those two people for 2 days until he was approached. He didn't turn himself in. He was approached by the police based on video that they saw. So my question is, what does your client have remorse? Because he didn't seem to initiate, didn't call and say, hey, this is what happened. This is what I did. This person may be struggling. They were making these noises. It sounded like they were dying when I left their apartment. And has your client apologized to Jerry Smith's family? I know they were in court.
He has. And yes. I apologized for Isi. Isi apologized as well. He feels terrible. I mean, he is responsible for the death of another human being. And he does feel bad. But I will tell you that, again, in his view, it was a life or death situation in which he literally had 3, 4, or 5 seconds in order to make a decision based on what he thought was about to happen. And the reason he did not, yes, he did, he punched him quick. And then he said that was my sign to run out. Then I felt, safe enough to where I could run out. And he did not go back. He did not call the police. And when the police picked him up during the questioning process, they asked Isi repeatedly, what do you think happened? Well, I'm sure he, probably probably needed to be iced up. That's what Isi described. I thought he needed, probably had a few bruises on his face. He had no idea he had hurt Jerry Smith to the extent that he did.
How big of a man is Isimemen Etute?
Isi is, he weighed about right around 200 pounds at that point in time. He's
okay.
6'2". Jerry Smith was 6'1", weighed about 155, 160. And he was about 6'1". Again, but dressed up, in a hoodie. So so Isi had no idea, the size or the strength of the person that he was dealing with. The only thing he knew was that.
So Jerry Smith was 6'1".
about
And
6'1", I think. That's
EC had gone to his house, and he thought he was hooking up with a woman
yes.
who was 6'1".
He thought, yes, he did. Correct.
James, let me tell you why I appreciate you coming on the show. Like, immensely. I appreciate you coming on the show because this is just not easy. This is a tough one, man. Like,
I know it. I know it is. I know it's tough, and you know it's tough on me as well. You know, and I will tell you though that again, maybe hearing from EC at some point in time on your show may be a good idea.
Would love to hear from him.
He is the most likable young 18-year-old man I have ever met. I don't mind telling you that my 37 years of practice, I don't know that I've ever liked a client more than EC Etute. He comes from an exceptionally great family. They're all very religious. They dropped him off at school. Mom and dad did.
Makes sense.
You know, when he was living his dream of going to Virginia Tech to play football, and they told him, be careful about alcohol, drugs, and girls. They never told him that, you know, son, you really also might want to stay away from websites where, you know, males might be posing as females and might seek you out and try to take advantage of you. So, you know, I absolutely love him. I love him. He and his family. You know, he stayed at my house many times during the process of you know, having hearings, and he's just an exceptional young man. And again, I think the jury saw that in him as well.
This is similar to what I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you, I'm assuming you came onto the case after the initial police interview. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes, about 2 days later, Rachel.
Why did you want to take this case knowing the stakes, knowing that it could be controversial?
I mean, well, I've been practicing for 37 years. I've handled probably literally hundreds of murder cases. We had capital murder in Virginia until recently when they did away with the death penalty. I've handled more than 70 capital murder cases. So, you know, they're challenging, but I went and met with him in the jail, I think the second day that he was locked up. And there's something about him, Rachel, Van. I mean, he's just a likable young man. He's so soft-spoken. He is so well-grounded in where he has at least come from up till this point in time. And I just saw a lot of really, really good in this young man. And this is a tragic ending for the Smiths and for Jerry Smith. And I understand. I don't think that this is any sign of the LGBTQ community, and they have to be fearful at this point. I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think that was the verdict whatsoever. I don't think that's what it stands for. And I just think this is one of those tragic circumstances which, you know, could have been avoided and should have been avoided on a number of different sides. And but I will tell you that you know, Isi Etute, I don't want him back in Blacksburg. I don't think he needs to be at Virginia Tech again. He needs to go elsewhere and try to pick up his life where he's left off as well. Again, I hope this is not any kind of sign or a signal and anybody, you know, treats it like that. It's just one of those circumstances in which I think a jury looks strictly at the self-defense issue. And was this a set of circumstances where, you know, a 40-year-old man, Jerry Smith, who sought out, you know, these young boys, you know, and it was all in his environment, you know, could this have been avoided? And, you know, do they think he was reaching for a knife? Yes, I think they did think that he did. And I think that they thought that he would have harmed Isimemen Etute if he'd had that opportunity. I mean, why not think that? Because he's harmed all these young kids for so long and he's never had to answer for that. And I don't think he gave, you know, a rat's ass about, you know, the harm that he did to any of them.
But the jury didn't hear that part.
No, they did not. They did not.
James Turk, thank you. I appreciate you coming on Higher Learning today, man. Complicated case, but one that we have to talk about. We really appreciate you coming on the show. Seriously, man.
Thank you both.